thank you for coming at 8:30 in the morning. Yeah, you guys. Give yourself a hand to be here at 8:30 in the morning. Okay, this is more of a story than it is a briefing, a technical briefing. We're going to take you on this journey from uncovering something in a distributed control system for an energy production in a cogeneration facility for natural gas. We'll go through some of the minutiae of this, and we're going to take you through this journey, and I hope that the ending is a little bit unexpected for you, because it's actually a lot of fun. So our agenda for today is we're going to go into the background, just a brief background on what actually happened and what the conditions that led to it. We're going to go through the response plan activities, because this is an ICS and a SCADA ICS specific show. And I want you guys to continuously think about the nuances in industrial control systems that make traditional incident response and forensics difficult and different. We know now, because of availability, integrity, and confidentiality, as opposed to traditional confidentiality, integrity, and availability, what we know how to do in the IT space does not always map perfectly. Can I get a quick show of hands for folks that have actually tried to do real-time incident response forensics on industrial automation? Okay, so just maybe half of one person. Good. Again, good for you for being here at 8:30. You may raise your hand half an hour from now and go, oh wait, what? Yes, I did that. So we're going to go through active real-time activities, and again, the stress is real-time. We are talking about doing real-time production systems. We can't go bag tag, take stuff offline. We can't do that. Here's a gas turbine generator that might actually have components of it infected. Well, let's just take it offline and go get the extra one. No, it does not work like that. And then we'll go through the analysis portion and the conclusion. So for us, we've done a few of these things, not like rollout from ICS cert or C-cert in Canada. We've done about 21 of these since 2009, and the response triggers have actually varied. And the reasons we get to do these are broad, and some of them are quite hilarious. Of course, first of all, you have single incident malware. Most of the time, perhaps 90% of the time, organizations find a virus in their control system and they freak out. They go, oh my God, it's the end of the world. We're physically and logically separated. There's no way anything could have been here. Come, please help us. And it turns out to be nothing. There are times when you get calls from organizations that are saying, yo, I'm in the electric sector and I'm watching port 20,000 traffic leave my network. It's on my DNP. I've been taken over, but really it's a botnet or a BitTorrent server trafficking pornography or music out of your corporate domain. We've seen ingress attacks from corporate to SCADA, where you actually have active malware doing what it knows how to do. Laterally spread and try and exploit transitive trust across domains, from one domain to the other. You have database to database, and people get concerned about that. You have events actually triggered at the perimeter, or egress components where something's trying, whatever it is, to beacon out of the control system domain. And it could be malware, it could be a piece of new industrial equipment put on the network trying to rebroadcast its information and join some other networking component. Or my favorite is that you have the antivirus and countermeasures behaving badly. That translates to real antivirus systems going in and grabbing what it thinks is bad malware and quarantining the files. It goes and grabs legitimate control system executables and libraries and takes them out of production, forcing the whole system to crash. And that's problematic for an asset owner, because they're going to see an antivirus trigger happen and all of a sudden their control systems stop working and they go, oh my God, oh no, we're hit. So, and the sectors we've seen this across cover pipeline, oil and gas, generation, transmission, and distribution, also water, mining, and chemical. So let's look at the case preconditions right now. We're talking about gas turbine generators. They're parallel GTGs in a co-generation facility. And there's multiple locations for this. We have a primary location. We have local HMI and engineering workstations to the generation facility itself. And then we have the remote functions. It is a single control network with tiered DCS. And you have this micronet / control net inside the facility itself. And the DCS and the control net vendors are different. So you have the control function of the HMIs right down to the PLCs, vibration monitoring, and turbine control systems. And then you actually have the asset management distributed control system that does information modification, engineering workstations, and things like this. And these are just brief pictures there of these gas turbine. This is great. If you're not familiar with how this works, it's basically a jet engine that is force-fed gas to burn and you stick a stick down the middle of it and it spins and makes power. The most wonderful engineering device you have ever seen. Even more wonderful if you have the opportunity to watch these things self-destruct and wobble and blow up. It's awesome. Again, something you may not be able to appreciate at 8:30 in the morning. You might be able to get your head around it in half an hour from now. And the site also had an existing response plan. The incident background, so the facility goes online, it gets wet tested in 2011, and I want you to remember the 2011 date because before 2011 is 2010 and 2009. It's a very secure, aware, and forward-leaning entity. Double E's, electrical engineers with double majors in things like computer science and security have built this system. So they understand the electrical engineering for generation component, but they've also built the network from a computer science and security perspective as well. The site had previously been hit by Configure and it was eradicated, which helped drive them towards a better cybersecurity posture, which included a whole bunch of cybersecurity protocols for bringing removable media plug-and-play devices into and taking out of the facility. So there was ingress and egress management for removable media. And this is important as in our story because this facility, like many facilities, limits introduction of new information to the production environment, specifically through removable media. They had the establishment of anomaly detection and egress filtering right there. And this, as this turns out later, is very, very useful in helping us understand recommended best practices in defense in depth. For in the event something happens in the control system environment from active malware, how egress filtering, not allowing DNS resolution to happen for non-production environments, prohibits the second and tertiary bad things from actually happening. Late in 2011, something new comes across the DCS, across the distributed control system. What was interesting is that the incident occurred concurrent with an on-site investigation for a completely unrelated matter. So here's what's interesting. The complexity of the control system environment and the fact that it was still pretty new did not allow one single antivirus or anti-malware solution to be deployed ubiquitously across the entire environment. And in fact, some machines themselves were not at the point of being patched. Machine 0 or patient 0, where this thing first got discovered, apparently, actually didn't have an antivirus. The malware, and this is where the whole thing starts, the malware was reported from a visiting engineer out of country. So the engineer had come from another country to visit and had gone through the process of saying, I'm here to do some updates to the HMIs, scanned their USB going into the organization following their natural protocol, and something like the Impex tool you saw downstairs, a much more crude version of that amazing thing you see down in the Geek Lounge, is a PC with 6 or 7 antivirus systems on it, and it gets scanned. The USB gets scanned, the engineer walks in, does his work. While the engineer is actually working on site, he cites that one of the HMIs is hot. There's a virus on that, and then leaves without rescanning on the way out and decides to call the asset owner and say, yeah, I did my updates. Oh, by the way, there's a virus on your master HMI at the primary turbine. And the asset owner's going, okay, sure, let's go take a look at that. The problem is that the first round investigation could not determine whether or not the malware got there from the engineer, or because the system was so new, the malware was there when the system was installed. This prompted the asset owners to phone the police, and actually they phoned the federal authorities at that time. Our response tactics followed a two-tier. So first of all, you have the immediate remote support, which we're obligated to do, and then you have the flyaway team. We followed the SANS Pickerel model, which is preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and of course, lessons learned. This is the model that we actually wanted to follow. But we did go with a two-tier approach, and we did ensure that there was integrated IT and control system-specific subject matter expertise on the teams that were being developed. So you have the initial component of the response to say, we have the malware at hand, and you have to build the flyaway team to determine what tools, techniques, and capabilities are going to be required for on-site support. So for preparation, we actually followed the DHS and NIST incident response plan. The ICS CERT has, of course, published recommended strategies for creating and performing incident response and forensics and control systems. And it is designed to allow you to empower the reader or the expert going to do the investigation to take into consideration of capturing real-time intelligence because you can't take the system offline. You're also looking at things like volatile memory and state information and the process tables because that is going to give you definitive information on how the system may have been compromised. All the work that had been done in INL and other places around the world shows that in attacking or writing malware for industrial automation, the best way to do it is to get into the processes themselves. Because you're doing the investigation on a live system, you are going to be forced to be looking at specific volatile, looking at RAM and the process tables themselves to try and find out what the RAM is doing. So we know that DHS and the NIST process actually worked. We grabbed 50 new USBs which were sanitized, and this is just a note forward, you do not need 120 gigabit, 256 gig keys to do this. You can get away with a handful of small 1 or 2 gigabyte keys for this, because remember, when you go and do, this is just for those of you that are interested in it, when you go and do your sampling for industrial control system events, you are not going to be getting hundreds of gigabytes of information at a single time. You are going to be getting small little bytes of information, and every time you get that byte of information, that key is going to go into an evidence bag. Don't spend a lot of money on really big, expensive USB keys, knowing that they are going to only get a little bit of data, and you're going to have to say goodbye to them and never see them again if there is a chain of custody and the end state is actually going to be some sort of prosecution. So taking 50 new USBs, the tools that we used for this, knowing it was going to be production in the toolkit, along with a whole variety of different cables, we had FastDump Pro, which at the time was going to be HB Gary, FTK Imager for that. We used the sysinternals and WinDD, and TCP dump. We took TCP dump, yes, we also took Wireshark, but be reminded, TCP dump for the capture and creation of the PCAPs is going to be necessary because we want to look at the information flows. We're not putting Wireshark right on the system initially, because we all know to some extent Wireshark, when used, will introduce the vulnerability of the system that's being introduced to the system. So we went with the traditional approach of taking the TCP dump to catch PCAPs, and then offline put them in to Wireshark. That's just good security practice. We did confirm existing backups for the Acronis, and one of the things that became really important is the creation of the spread maps. And this is where the expertise from traditional IT and control systems differ when it comes to incident response. Spread maps is being able to look at the logical architecture of the environment and being able to ascertain that malware that has a certain component of lateral spread, based on the interoperability and interconnections of the control system itself, how will something move? That becomes very important. If the malware is going to be weaponized, the subject matter expert for the control system space is going to look at it and say, I have the engineering workstation that has transitive trust over to this Pi server or this database or something else, which actually goes to the secondary engineering workstation, which calls from the HMI, which talks to the PLC, to the database return, to the tag server, on and on and on. There is the requirement to create something called a spread map to determine that when you're going on site, what are the most plausible, most important targets of evaluation based on the architectural analysis. Where should you be looking in case this thing is going to be weaponized? So the tactics, basically there was an initial analysis of the malware. We wanted to look at the behavior. We certainly wanted to look at the command and control capability of the malware and what it was going to do. That became very important because you're going to do this on a production system. And it's in the system that is actually running. The other main concern that you have to be aware of is that when you're going to production environments for control systems, you are at the mercy of when you can get to the system, either because of system availability or the owners or the engineers that need to be on hand for you to that system. In the control system domain, it's not a simple matter of just walking in and saying, ta-da, we're here, let's do everything we're supposed to do. It's a production generation facility. You have to wait until the window of opportunity is there and the appropriate subject matter experts and engineers from the asset owner are there to help you get what you need to do. There is a very specific schedule that has to be followed. The flyaway team, who is actually going to go out to the site, gets the investigation plan. One of the things we couldn't do originally, right off the bat, was prove that it was not intentional, because the local physical access logs that were there didn't provide any support as well. On site, we actually find out that it's AutoHamFam. We're going to go into a little more detail about how this otherwise benign piece of malware could actually be very, very, very bad in control systems. This is the whole problem about malware and viruses in control systems. When we think we have it under control, in the event we don't have effective countermeasures in place, even the most seemingly benign nuisance types of malware, ones that are traditionally impacting availability, integrity, confidentiality things, it has a completely different kinetic consequence in control systems just because of the nature of the control system itself. We had to go and determine the existing antivirus countermeasures that were in place and look at the infection landscape. And this actually comes with, again, concurrent analysis with doing the spread mapping on there. We have to prioritize and schedule access to the assets based on what the asset owner is going to allow us to do. let's break down how it comes into 3 specific areas. So you've got main imaging, you've got the processes analysis, and then you've actually got the core. These are the concurrent functions that we've determined to be most useful when doing control systems. It does require explicit understanding of the applications on the control system side, what the vendors are doing, and a specific technical understanding about the behavior of the applications, because you're doing a contrast and compare about the behavior you are observing in real time on the infected system versus what you should see on a non-infected system. The main imaging component are pretty straightforward because you're looking at the preloaded servlets and you're mapping the known executables and the libraries based on the actual authorized, legitimate functionality of the control system applications. That is being done concurrently with egress filtering, either from the infected servers themselves or from the control system domain trying to get outbound. For the running processes, you're actually looking at the handles, the virtual address space, and open network sockets. Remember, one of the luxuries we have in industrial automation is that the systems we're looking at do the same thing all the time, day after day. Incredibly predictable, incredibly deterministic. There is a normal operational envelope that we need to understand. So when you're doing incident response and forensics analysis, you want to get drilling down into open network sockets, the ports that are actually being called, right? Robert talked about it yesterday, saying looking for deviations and abnormality on the network for things that just are not supposed to be there. The malware may be trying to do something, and you're going to be able to find that in the running processes of the device where it's trying to do something that it's not normally supposed to do. And this should be able to light up pretty quickly. Getting down into the core aspects, you're looking at device and driver layering. You're looking for evasive techniques in the malware itself. If you have copies of the malware, you're going to be looking for specific functionality in the control system space where it's doing system identification and possible evasive maneuvers, things like stall tactics, being able to do fingerprinting and things like this. This, of course, adds a level of complexity to the analysis because if you're taking malware that has done fingerprinting as an evasion technique off an infected engineering workstation and try and put it into another system for analysis, when the malware fires up, it will not recognize that it will recognize that it's not on the same original either virtual or bare metal platform that it originally infected on and may not necessarily run. So some of these techniques are pretty tricky. When we had actually run this first level of analysis, we came up with 30 live assets that needed to be done. 30 live production assets that needed to be done concurrently across a verified schedule. 7 HMIs, 7 backup HMIs moved through multiple databases. The primary validation computer, which in itself had 6 antivirus mechanisms in it, that had to be included in the realm of possibility of the machine that actually introduced infection into the system as well. Multiple operator workstations, engineering workstations, master engineering workstations, and the asset owner actually wanted to also include things like physical protection systems as well, because the way the networks were interconnected, there was a possibility that a vector could have been introduced through camera systems, wireless, and other things like this. We also had to look specifically at vendor access, right? Like many organizations around the world, they have real-time 24/7 remote vendor access into the system. So we created this naming convention. Across all those 30 assets in a production environment with 2 teams spread over 2 different sites, every single system was going to be subjected to the initial test of infection by USB. And again, in a second we're going to get down into the mechanics of Hamwick and how it actually moved. So every single possible machine was tested by the insertion of a native, clean USB stick to see if the malware would actually move, and then analysis of that malware to determine if it has been modified based on the specifics of the control system component it had actually infected. We actually got live states for the RAM and the page file and also got the volatile information itself. We can't afford to lose that. Fortunately, in this particular case, we did not have to go down to the PLCs and the field devices themselves because based on the malware and the lateral spread, there was no functionality seen that would allow for direct infection into the PLCs. We also did extensive network and communications analysis to ensure that the communications between the HMI's engineering workstations and other identifiable senior serving assets to the field equipment was benign. We saw nothing to indicate that the PLCs themselves were actually hit. We took forensic image of the local volumes. We also had Acronis backups. The interesting thing here, and whether or not we were lucky, we don't know, this all got pulled off exactly to a planned schedule. Every single one of those assets got reviewed and looked at in the very small window that we had that was given to us by the asset owner. They said you can only do this between 9 and 10 o'clock because between after that and before that, that system is critical. The redundancy actually allowed us opportunities to go after the systems that were in redundant mode, leaving production, and when we had to go to the actual production, they'd flip over to the redundant backups, allowing us to go get those systems. For the RAM and the page file, again, we went to the HB Gary, and HB Gary is very useful in this because of the real-time state analysis. There's no cap to the RAM because we don't know what we're getting into, and allowed us to sample on both 32 and 64-bit systems. This became very, very handy and was still capable on one of those smaller memory-based USB sticks. We put everything in an HPAC format because when it's in HPAC, we can actually pull apart and parse the components in there that we need. And again, because we're working in control systems environment on production live systems, there is a tempo that's going to be required to say, I have my sampling, I'm dissecting the sampling, I'm looking at it, and now I need to know what the effective mitigation strategy is going to be in real time, so when my window for mitigation opens up on the control system side, I can go back and implement that. We did not have a copy of the original USB. The USB was gone. We do know that the engineer who called back and said, my personal antivirus has called this thing as malautoinf.b, we couldn't verify that off the actual USB, that he or she, I don't know if it was a he or a she, we're just going to say that the engineer never actually asked that question, it's not important, but the visiting engineer actually took the USB with him. We did concurrent traffic analysis with that, and what's interesting is because we actually ran this thing on NCase and FTK, NCase on the images, the Acronis backups that we actually had, they were offline, and we could do a comparative analysis between the control system backups on Acronis, right, versus actually pulling them directly using FTK. And the time differences was amazing because this stresses the importance of control system specific backups and using a tool like NCase. We did it over 2 hours, and FTK took more than 5.5 hours after all was said and done and the systems did get offline to actually pull those archives. So here, let's get down to the meat of it. What was it? This thing was, we got lucky and we got burned at the same time. So it's hamwhack. And this little nasty thing, fortunately, always has the same hash value and writes the same file name and infects the same way. All right? So Sophos is W32 Auto Ham Fam, Microsoft is WormWin32, hamwhack, a bunch of different names for it. And you're looking at this and you go, oh, I've actually had that, it's not a big deal. Putting it in the context of what the malware does in control systems is not so good, and this is why it was alarming. The bottom 5 or 6 notes there are real-time quick recursive queries to the USB drives looking for the insertion of USB keys. This malware does not spread over the network. This malware spread and has specifically been designed to spread through P&P. It'll spread through USB, it'll spread through other media that get plugged in through USB, and this is going to be important later on in our discussion. It creates egress traffic on the process control network because it's trying to zombie and bot the device that it's sitting on. It begins to broadcast out onto the network. If it was a traditional IT domain, we wouldn't be so worried. When we're talking about process control systems, there's a finite amount of traffic that can go onto the network, and we all know that the introduction of rogue, unknown, unverified traffic into the control system as it begins to beacon out and hit devices on the control system network can have unexpected, perhaps sometimes catastrophic damage. Also, it actually causes sporadic shutdown and reboot. And it actually tries to continuously try DNS resolution to get out to this place called USB to visittype.info on port 3498. We can actually see this. This from the, looking at the overall identification, the process is simple. Some user actually gets this on their machine, and through USB it goes on and on and on. The device itself begins to write itself as this csrxx.exe into this phantom recycler bin. Now, the fact that control systems and their applications today run on operating systems mostly like Windows, the virus itself actually hides itself in a phantom recycler. So when you're actually going through to try and find this, and this is where the engineers ran into the problem, they couldn't actually find it because the recycling folder that gets written, in the Windows there's redirection when you actually click on your recycling folder and it takes you to the real one, so that the original virus, the original malware, the CSRXX and all its executables with it, hides in a hidden actually hides in a hidden directory called recycler. This is actually pretty nasty. This is just a quick snapshot. You can actually see where it's hiding. In one sense, we got lucky because there was no real hard lift to determine what the malware was going to be, because there was very clear identifiable MD5s, and we were looking for the CSRXX. Our next step was to try and find out where it was in each one of the machines, but we want to find the infection vector. Where did it actually come from? And we know it comes by USB, so now we've got to start thinking about how do we recursively go back in time to all these machines and the samples in real time and find out how many USBs were actually going to be stuck into the devices that were infected. The problem with this and trying to run it in a Windows particular environment, you're never really going to be able to see the virus where it lands, so we ended up taking it into the Unix environment and firing it up in Raptor. Here you can actually see the cycle, where the file is actually open, goes to the recycle bin. There's that autorun.inf, which is responsible for constantly trying to get the malware off the machine it is on onto some other portable media that's going to be moved somewhere else. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you can actually see the INI folder. It is always going to hide in the same folder with the same SID. So we got lucky with that. We got lucky with that because we're not talking about polymorphic malware that's going to change from state to state to state. We were able to take the TCP dump captures and put them into Wireshark and actually notice that this device and the devices that were affected in the control system were trying to get at to usb.misintype.info. It didn't actually make it. So now we go to the prefetch analysis. I'm jumping ahead 3 or 4 days into the investigation, going to the prefetch analysis. The question comes up, of course, is how does persistence happen? When you go to the HKLM key structure, the registry files in there, you can actually see stub modifications for that, and this new recycler value. And again, we got lucky because csrxx.exe always shows up at the same time, and you can actually begin to parse out using prefetch files and the RAM memory states to find out when that ran in the context of whatever other control system specific applications. So for the remote engineering workstation, the MEWS, one of the first ones we looked at for the prefetch, we actually found that there were 6 files that actually had reference to the malware and 3 files that were associated. Well, at this particular time, one was run 60 times, and we think it was from a binary inside a local or removable hard disk drive. This is where things get interesting because we are talking about an infection that happened prior to the system showing up. Snapshots, this has been obfuscated to the best of its ability because without that obfuscation you could probably quickly determine the system, or at least the vendor or the components of that, but it's really not important. Down here, and again, we're talking about a 2011 specific discovery. 2011, 2012 discovery of the virus. When you actually look at the CSRXX executable files, look at the creation dates. The creation dates, they begin to hover as early as February 2010. February 2010. Are you telling me that malware was actually in the system that shows up at primary HMIs and entering workstations with something already in it? Is that even possible? Is that even possible? We need to begin to take a closer look at how this malware possibly jumped from device to device to device. The restore points in the registry give us Hive information. The core components for the Hive take us through SAM, security software, system user. Software and ntuser.dat had reference to the malware. Means that at some level, somebody in an administrative role actually was able to introduce malware into the system. Whether it was an administrator that inadvertently put an infected USB stick in, or somebody was doing something and brought the malware through some other channel into the device. The analysis got pretty interesting because when we parse out all the active Hive information compared to the prefetch files, we found that there was 34 unique USB devices that at some point in time were introduced to the primary HMI at the offsite, and there was 26, that's going through restore points and system hives, there was 26 on the primary HMI. The primary one, HMI one, is the one where that phantom engineer actually said, oh, by the way, you're infected. There was no antivirus on it at the time, but that's the one we were looking at. We got it down to finding that there was a serial number of 4 USBs or removable media devices that were actually responsible for introducing the malware, most likely before the system showed up on site. The problem is that the initial infection to the initial detection far exceeded 150 days. So that thing had been sitting in there for quite a while. For the sysinternals, just quickly, we walked through some of what we thought, you guys would be able to see this later, the live analysis. These are the sysinternals that turn out to be most important in a control system specific analysis because you're looking at state information, net stats. This is the primary set of functions that you can use in real time to take advantage of the fact that you have some predetermined predictability and deterministic function of the system you're investigating. You know what the normal operational envelope is. Having a normal operational envelope understanding allows you to take the sampling using something like sysinternals and do an effective contrast and compare against what the system is doing now versus what it should be doing somewhere else. And when you do this contrast and compare specific in the ICS domain, it's remarkably effective. So when we go through the live analysis, this is actually pretty cool because the Hamlet by itself was a denial of service tool. It was designed to bot a zombie and broadcast out to the network. How old school was it? Well, it's pretty interesting. When you actually go through the malware analysis, you break it down into these suspicious modules, the COM modules, you see the socket options and the send to strings. If you actually walk down the strings, the first one is for the adjustment of the token privileges. This is really neat because this allows you for something like code injection. But when you get down to the bottom arrows, and I just love this when we took it apart, you actually see that you have flooding done, a commentary in the code itself, and it actually says start flooding and super syn. How great is that? Super syn was one of the earliest efforts, along with a tool called Poseidon, which was this flooding attack, this syn storm to attack a system. This is why it would be benign in the traditional IT domain. It's just like almost every single one of our computers at home, even our kids' crappiest little new computers, are not going to fall victim to something like syn flooding and syn flood packet storm. But yet take that and put it into an industrial control system and broadcast unsolicited syn packets on a whole bunch of different ports into the network. What are the odds that something bad is going to happen? This is a great example of taking a traditional lame payload and modifying it to have less than desirable impacts in the control system world. When we peel back the layers even more, we start looking at the random volatile data. What's actually running? What are those processes? And the ones that came out were this desktop INI, SOS.exe, Legend of Mir, CSRX, of course, and Misotype. These are the associated functions that we saw. There's 3 in there that immediately cause us grief. What are those? Anybody want to shut out what those are? Technically, these are remnants from the Phyllis virus. Phyllis virus, when it runs, it has this association to Legends of Mir, but it also writes something called SOS.exe. In the real world, when IT parachutes into a situation like this and they go, oh my god, we've got something totally infected here, I'm doing my analysis on the engineering workstation, the HMI, SOS.exe, that's analogous to the old Phyllis virus. Wipe that out. Stop. Hang on. Wait. There's more. Without the proper understanding of the applications in the software for the particular generation software, you fail to recognize that SOS.exe is a vendor-specific executable that is responsible for protocol translation. The removal of that executable will instantaneously bring everything to a grinding halt. Safety, point-to-point comms, engineering to HMI, HMI to database, everything. Right? It was not syphilis. It looked like it, it smelled like it, there was remnants for something else that happened a long time ago, but for all intents and purposes, the thing that they wanted to get rid of was the very core for protocol conversion inside the generation facility. Moving on to containment right now, every single asset underwent the same identical analysis. And with that, we tried to migrate antivirus for containment and control. We migrated antivirus solutions onto the DCS and to the HMIs and things like this. But remember, we've got 2 different vendors, so there's competing opinions on how the antivirus, which product goes in. One of the things we ran into is that doing the analysis on some of the HMIs that actually were patched, we found a vendor-specific firewall/antivirus system. We contacted the vendor of the control system component. They say, well, we don't have any reason to ever put firewalls or antivirus on an HMI, even though we were able to uncover a public announcement, a piece of marketing collateral that said, we're this control system vendor and we've officially partnered with these guys. So we found firewall and antivirus inside one of the HMIs, and a deeper drill on that said that there was like site name _HMI/firewall on the HMI. Still, we went to the vendor, they said, we don't know what you're talking about. When we peeled back the rule sets inside the firewall, yes, there was a 24/7 VPN, but we also noticed that in the rule set category, there was unfettered access if you came from the vendor's Class A. Anyone from within a Class A could get to that system. Wow. Comparing infection versus shutdown, we tried so hard to ascertain that there was specific influence on reliability of the system when the malware fired up. We couldn't do it. We got very, very close, but we could not effectively establish causation. We're getting quickly to the point where we were no longer being allowed to be there because there was enough intelligence that the asset owner and the authorities wanted to go and try and figure out what's going on. But we pressed forward and started focusing on the HMI itself, right? We took all of the artifacts to the pre-HMI engineering workstation build and delivery. So we went back in time, looked at all those USBs, and went and found out what the USBs did when introduced to those systems during the build stage. And we found 2 interesting things. We found 2 different iPhones and 2 different iPods that at one time were inserted into the machines that ultimately became the primary servers for the human-machine interface. Snapshots here of the work that was done in terms of breaking down device name, description, device type, connections, serial numbers, obfuscated for the obvious reasons. Here's the shot for the here's the shot now for the USBs on the engineering workstations. Here is the snapshot where you actually see the image for the primary HMI1. And you can actually see at this point, wait a second, going back to these dates, and again, we're talking about pre-delivery, we're seeing an iPhone and an iPod actually put in there in addition to a whole bunch. Now, maybe someone is just charging their phone. Well, I'm just going to take my phone and I'm going to charge it. I'm not doing it. They're just charging this phone on this server, which is ultimately going to be an unbelievably piece of mission-critical equipment in a generation facility. But it's okay. I'm just powering my phone. And we actually drilled down and actually looked at the USB on the HMI. It then occurred to us, wait a second. Is there a possibility that someone used this for personal gain during the printed process? We're looking in the wrong spot. There should be evidence that maybe someone didn't do it intentionally, but something came in somehow through some other networking component that actually got onto a device that was inserted into it, never scanned, and actually went out as the HMI. We begin to start parsing through files you would never look at when you're doing incident response on something like control system. Internet Explorer. Why would Internet Explorer be important on something like a control system? First of all, it shouldn't actually be there, and in many cases, and for this particular system, Internet Explorer wasn't actually there. But what was there was the remaining artifacts for somebody prior to build who went out online around February in 2010, and actually went online looking for Valentine's Day stuff. Out of the browser cache, on the server of what was the HMI which was infected, you can see the full path analysis in the HMI documents and setting and the local settings, temporary internet files. Valentine's Day is coming. Someone building the system actually bothered to go out and peruse the internet, and perhaps more than that, more upsetting than that, they ended up off the iPhone. Somehow, someone had actually taken selfies of themselves and stuck that in the device as well. Supply chain and love. How did they get it out there? That evening, there's the artifact that shows that the firewall is disabled and Live Messenger is actually turned on. Someone thought it was important to say that, yeah, I know this is going to really be in production one day. Somehow it didn't get cleaned. I'm like, you know, these things happen. Developers can actually do that. Not cleaning the system can be problematic. Artifacts being on there to show that this was actually done prior to the installation of the system and it showed up makes us want to revisit the evaluation we're doing in the supply chain, whether or not it was intentional. So we're able to take enough analysis for an active piece of malware, trace it right back down to the devices, the USB and the phones that were actually used in the development process, and find artifacts related to infection that came from the supply chain, even though absolutely we can't confirm it was intentional or not, but we found the artifacts of the guys doing that. It is at this time that we as the research team were asked to leave, and to this day we have no idea what actually happened between the astronaut and the vendor. We don't know, we don't actually care. What we do know, and what's important, is the site changes associated with that. Currently, the firewall rules do not allow for this persistent access from this Class A, and they actually have 3-factor authentication. 2 you know, and 1 you have. So you got passwords, you got tokens. In the event that a vendor wants to actually do some remote access, the keys, the token authentication mechanism is actually now held by the asset owner, and there's a telephone call that actually has to happen where the vendor who needs to come in communicates with the asset owner, and the asset owner actually uses the authentication mechanism for that vendor at that point in time, locally generates the keys and provides those keys verbally for access. Other than that, there is no connection whatsoever. Oh, I'm burning through this. The forensics is now built into the ICS program, and they've actually put it into the QA testbed. The lessons learned, first of all, we know live forensics is absolutely possible. You need a predefined investigation plan. Watch out for the antivirus when you're rolling it in, because it will tend to go after proper executables and libraries and chew them out right outside of the industrial control system. Another interesting thing that we've taken from observables, right here when you're doing your analysis, the license keys, whether you're USB fobs or serial fobs in the back, when you are doing your investigation analysis in real time, it is entirely possible that the licensing keys for the software, for the control system applications, are actually going to drop out and unload. Be very careful of that. There are capabilities that are now built into control system vendor solutions that from an intellectual property protection, anything that looks like copying or taking information from a production system in a production state, the keys are going to unload themselves so that the keys are protected. And the vendors do not want illegal keys to be moved. So be very wary of that. And of course you know that when the keys drop out of a production system, the system stops working. Okay. And we can actually just get to all this. These are all some of the lessons learned. We can actually just go to questions. Here we go. Courage, really, you got to have balls to do this kind of stuff on a production system. And it's okay. It's okay. Do not stifle creativity. What you think is possible can be possible, right? Pay careful attention to your spread maps. Be creative, right? And have courage, because it is a bit of a scary thing to do on a production system. That's me.
Unfortunately, I think there will be no time for questions.
That's all right. I'm going to see what this.
But I think you can.
Oh yes, Bob. Yes.
Mark, can they grab you during the coffee break? Maybe you can discuss even more things with.
My shoes weren't untied. My fly didn't come down. It's all good. Yes. So.
Yeah, at least you were here.
I'm here. That's right. That's right. 8:30. See, take it.
Yeah, they're really.
Thank
Thank you very much.